English is not my first language, so please excuse any weird phrasing. This happened a few years ago, and I don't remember all the details clearly. When I was 20, I worked as a sort of carer for an autistic person, Sam, who at the time was in his late tweens. We'd meet for a few hours once a week and go to the playgrounds, go hiking, or generally just hang out. One time, we were at the playground. I noticed a man looking at the kids. He didn't seem to be there with any particular kid, which is why I noticed him there in the first place. When Sam was done playing at the playground, we headed to the tram to go hiking a bit before I was done at work. The man followed us, and I saw him enter the same tram as us, with no kid in tow. Thought it might be a happenstance, but found it odd. Didn't think too much of it while the tram was driving. When we reached our destination, I noticed him leave at the same time as us, but by another door again. Could have been a happenstance. But now I'm very aware of this guy. My gut tells me that he's following us. To get to the hiking trail, we have to go through a neighborhood. As we start walking, so does the guy. I get more and more stressed as we're getting closer to the woods. I don't want to leave the safety of the streets while this guy is following us. I tell Sam, I don't want to go hiking today. Let's turn around. Thankfully, he's okay with this. And as we turn, I see the guy go down the side street. He stops about 20 meters down the street and just stands there, looking innocently in the other direction as we walk past him. When we've walked by him and a bit down the road, he starts walking again, still following us. Now I know for sure he's following us. I'm freaking out, yet still trying to calm down so as to not aggravate Sam. We stop by another playground for a bit, but as I promised him we'll go to the dam at the end of the hiking trail, we don't stay there for long. Luckily there's another way to get to the dam, just walking by the road. However, there's a walking tunnel going under the tram line, where we'd be out of view for a moment. I want to run through the tunnel, but Sam refuses, so we walk together. We get to the other side before the guy following us enters the tunnel. When we get to the dam, I take notes on my phone, describing the guy following us, intending to go to the police with it the next day. I let Sam throw rocks into the water for a while until he gets thirsty, and we decide to walk to the store. The store is close to the bus stop too, so we catch the bus to get him home after we get him something to drink. I don't remember much of the walk to the store. I assume we went through the tunnel again, but I can't be sure. There's yet another way to get back to the tram stop, and from there, back to the road. And if memory serves me correctly, we'd have to pass the guy to get back up the road again. I don't remember much from the store either, but I think the guy didn't come into the store. He just waited for us outside. When we were done at the store, it was about time to get Sam home, so we head to the bus stop. The guy decides to stand next to me while we're waiting at the bus, and I'm calmly freaking out again. I can't show this guy where Sam lives. What do I do? At the same time, I realize all my descriptions of him are based on his clothes, and my phone has a camera. I open the Notes app and sneak a photo of the guy to go with the description of him. The photo comes out kind of crap. I open the camera app on my phone and take another photo, and the phone makes a camera sound. The guy apparently realizes I know he's been following us, because he gives a sheepish grin and sort of a half wave of his hand before leaving the bus stop. Just like that, he walks away. I'm still slightly freaking out, and I make absolutely sure he's not sneaking around the bus stop. He doesn't get on the same bus as us. I keep looking over my shoulder as we're walking from the bus to Sam's home. Once I've ushered him in, I tell his mom what happened, and that I don't think Sam knows. But if he has a reaction later that day, that might be why. I call my mom on my way home, just to have someone to talk to. I tell her what happened and that I'm shaken up by it, even though I don't think the guy was after me. And he had stopped following us. I still don't want to take the wooden path to my apartment when I get off the bus. I went to the police with a picture the next day and tell them my side of the story. I don't think anything ever came of it, as nothing illegal really happened. I've never seen this guy again, and I hope I never will. This happened a few years ago while I was still in my hometown. I was going for a late night walk in the early AMs, which is fairly common, and I always felt relatively safe and street smart to avoid bad situations. My walks would often take me all over town, though a favorite haunt was a park we had down by the river. Though it was known as a hangout spot for weirdos and druggies so late, I've walked there plenty of times and never encountered any problems, so I went down there again, all the same to enjoy the breezy river air. The walk to the park itself was uneventful, and so we'll get to the anatomy of the park itself, something vital to realize the magnitude of the issue. The park was unfenced and easy to get into, open to the public, and looking from the park itself, you could see an opening to the beach and river along it. There needed to be an opening because the beach was a bit of a drop-off. You had to take a moderate step down from the concrete supporting the park itself just to get onto the sand, and away from this opening. The distance between the concrete steps and beach became such a length that they needed fencing so as to prevent people from falling and hurting themselves. Basically, everywhere not beach led to a major drop-off into an only sparse line of sand or muddy area, with the only thing separating you from the drop was either fencing or a major tree line. So as I'm walking through the park, there's nobody around, and it's absolutely silent until the hooting of an owl breaks it. I'm surprised, because owls were rare in those parts and at that time of year, but I ignore it and continue to walk as it continues hooting. As I murmured closer to where it sounded, I noticed two things: that the owl sounded like it was in pain, and that it was on the ground. I get really concerned for it and want to help it, so I start going over to where the hooting is coming from, though tentatively, because even right then there was a weird chill climbing up my spine, though I couldn't say why. I get closer and it sounds louder, more hurt, and it's definitely on the ground, in the same place. I keep walking closer and hear it right behind the tree line, after the drop-off point. For more of the park's layout, anywhere past the tree line led to a drop that was just this thin line of earth separating you from the water, like a gorge. If you just jumped down, you weren't relatively stuck because you couldn't go forward from the water. Climbing back up was nightmarish for all the roots of trees jutting out, and going left or right would have forced you to follow an extremely narrow path with little room. This owl was right behind the drop-off point, so even getting closer, I couldn't see it. The owl kept hooting, and I got to right in front of the trees, and I could hear it right under me. All I had to do was jump down, and I would see it or be able to get it, but I didn't. The weird feeling, this chill up my back, kept getting higher and higher and more intense the closer I got, and my conscious brain finally picked up on why. I started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they all hooted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It hooted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It sounded again, and again, and again. And I finally realized why I felt so creeped out, and why my subconscious brain was screaming at me to run away. It wasn't an owl. It was a recording. A recording of a wounded owl on the ground, waiting for anyone to come with the intention of helping it. Past the tree line obscuring their vision, past a drop-off point you couldn't climb back up from, and on a path you couldn't run at all, where someone, anyone, could be waiting. It was a lure meant to lead someone into a trap, and I suddenly felt very, very cold and clammy, and like I was being watched. I immediately turned and started speed walking away, taking the nearest exit out of the park and onto as manly lit streets as I could, all the way home. constantly checking to see if I was being followed. I stayed up the entire night, fully paranoid and looking out all the windows I could see if anyone was there, though nothing bad ever did happen, and no one ever tried to get me. The next night I went back with my sister's cell phone with the intent to call the police and report it if I heard it again, but no hooting ever occurred, and upon a more thorough inspection, nobody seemed to be lying in wait. I kept an eye on the newspaper for a bit after that too, to check if anyone else reported similar happenings or, God forbid, if anyone got hurt in a similar incident. But nobody ever did, and it never happened to me again. That's the end of my story, and while I do continue to take night walks, I always carry a weapon on me to defend myself, and always make a point to trust my instincts. I really don't want to post this, as I would have been perceived as insane, or someone with a warped or false view of reality. Here I go anyway. As I'm done keeping this to myself, I know I can share this here as it's anonymous and will not have any personal repercussions due to this confession. This event unfolded over a year ago in my final year of high school. I live in a rural wooded area within the US. On the public bus on the way home from school, a man sat across the aisle. He was developmentally challenged in some way, the man making strange noises and looking at me, his face distorted in an uncomfortable manner. In response, I would stare at the floor awkwardly. Situations similar to these made me very uncertain and slightly distressed. My anxiety disorder probably didn't help either. Suddenly, the middle-aged, overweight, frightened-looking man darted his hand out and gripped my forearm tightly, creasing my uniform. He made a strange noise and looked in my eyes. I heard an unqueering tone to the noise and saw confusion in his eyes. At this point, I felt sorry for the stranger and asked him, "What's wrong?" My voice cracking twice due to my nerves. He slowly let go of my arm and sat back, looking forward with a smile slowly cracking across his face. This sent a shiver down my spine, but I soon forgot the man existed before I even got to my stop. The following few days were quite uneventful. The next time I saw the man was when I was walking to my friend's house. I dropped my phone as I was crossing a grassy field near my home. Turning and crouching to pick it up, I spotted the same strange man about 50 yards behind me. He suddenly stopped and stared. At least I think he was. I could barely recognize him from the distance due to my poor eyesight. Thoroughly creeped out, I hurried along to my friend's house, making sure no one was behind me. The next couple of days, I would have the same feeling of someone watching me. On dark nights especially, I would turn around sharply to try to catch a glimpse of the man, but never did. Eventually, I convinced myself it was my anxiety making me paranoid and told myself to get over it. Didn't put my mind at ease much. I know I should have listened to my gut. About a fortnight after first meeting this man on the bus, something fucking terrifying happened. I was walking my small King Charles dog through the small trail in the woods, about a mile from my house. I walk him nearly every day down the trail as he's getting old and fat, and it's needed for him. There's a small river that I allow him to play fetch in. The incident happened by the path, parallel to the river. Now and then I tend to look over my shoulder when I'm walking to see if anyone was walking behind me out of habit. I nearly fell over when I saw the man about 20 feet behind me. I ripped out my earphones and spun around to face him, shouting at him to what he wants. He replies with the same incoherent vowel sounds and started to walk quickly towards me. I sprinted with my dog in my hands, not even feeling his weight as I ran. I quickly jumped down into a small concrete drain built into the riverbank. Water seeped up through my socks and my jeans, but I didn't care. I focused on calming my breathing as I heard the man's footsteps approaching. My dog started barking, and I closed my hand around his snout and tried to muffle his growls and grunts. directly above me, I heard, "I told you it's real," as clear as day. It was the man. I could recognize his voice, although he was just making noises before I could still recognize his voice. He jumped down and I froze in fear, water splashing over me and the dog, who was now cowering. The man turned with a sharp piece of pipe in his left hand. "Love me," he wheezed with a grin painting on his face. Then all I heard was blood rushing past my ears as I leaped up and kicked him as hard as I could in the stomach. He stumbled in the water and fell on his back. I ignored him and used his body to jump onto the bank, my Vans crunching into his nose. I kept sprinting back towards the road, forgetting the existence of my dog while doing so. He was okay and found me later as I waited on the main road. Needless to say, I called the police, and turns out the guy was never found. I'd never seen him again on the bus or anything, and I'm constantly on edge now. We haven't moved, and I'm still unsure if I'm crazy or not. If you're reading this, creepy, disabled, or insane dude, let's not meet again. Back in my freshman year of college, I was a fairly trusting person and probably got myself into a lot of bad situations. I was pretty dumb and very lucky. However, there was one incident that will always remind me to have better situational awareness. I was walking back from my dorm from a class in the early evening, speed walking because I had to go to another class at the night and wanted time to relax beforehand. I had my earbuds in, listening to music, and as I passed a very tall, broadly built guy on the sidewalk as I was coming up from my dorm, I only took notice of him for a second because he was walking rather slowly and taking up the middle of the sidewalk. I had to step off into the grass to get around, but I don't think I did this rudely. I probably would have forgotten him entirely if the following events didn't occur. I crossed the street and walked up toward the hall's entrance and swapped my key. They warn us not to allow others to tailgate because people unauthorized into the building can get in. No one followed this rule, and I didn't want to ever be rude and close the door on someone right behind me. That's when I noticed the guy I had passed earlier was close enough for me to let him grab the door and let him in, which I allowed, thinking again nothing of it because it's something I always did. I lived on the 5th floor, which was a girls' only floor. The genders were separated by floors, so floor 4 and floor 6 would be the men's floor nearest to mine. He and I got on the elevator with a few other people. I pressed the button for the 5th floor and noticed he didn't press any numbers. That's fine, maybe he was getting off on the floors before mine, like the others in the elevator. We stop at the 2nd floor and a couple leaves. He doesn't get off. We stop again at the 4th floor and the remaining person leaves. He stays, and we're alone. That's when I start to feel a bit funny. He wasn't standing too close or anything, but he seemed to be looking anywhere but at me as we rode up to the 5th floor. I did think it was odd, but could be explained by a mere coincidence. We stopped on my floor and I was to leave first, relieved to empty the awkward space and continue on my way. Now, my hall was a Y-shaped building. Upon leaving the elevator, you either went left or right, down 2 separate wings. I turned left as my dorm is about in the center of the left wing. That's when I noticed he was following behind me, and even when I picked up my pace, he kept up with me. Being taller, he wasn't exactly hurrying, but this is what really pushed my paranoia. He really felt he was walking on his own, with a destination in mind, and he could easily pass me if he wanted to. But no, he maintained a steady distance from me. As I was being followed, I started to panic, and when I reached the door, I realized how empty my floor was at the time of the day. He was going to reach me just as I opened the door, and that's when I decided it would be better to stay in the public space and scream if I needed to. I could also run further down the hall and down the stairs at the end of the wing. If I opened my dorm door, it would be too easy for him to come in, lock the door, and overpower me. I always kept my keys in my pocket, but as he approached, I instead swung my backpack off my back. so I could leave it if I needed to run, and fumbled around inside as if I was searching for my keys. I don't know why I was trying to act cool, as if I wasn't scared, and that I wasn't opening the door because I was terrified of him, especially since maybe he might pass me and actually be visiting someone further down the hall, and I would look silly then. That's when he stopped just 2 yards away from me, past all the other doors, stopping at mine. He stood there for a moment and I ignored him, hand fumbling uselessly around the inside of my backpack. I did not look up, and then he turned and walked back down the way he came, and I heard the elevator door open, feeling safe to open my dorm door without fear he might come charging back down the hallway. I hurriedly got inside and locked the door. I immediately called my mother just in case. Needed to feel not only totally alone since my roommate was not home. Later I calmed down and waited until my roommate returned. I skipped my next class because I didn't want to walk in the dark. Initially I had felt good about my quick thinking, but then I realized one really bad important detail. I should have kept walking. I should have stopped at my door because now he knew which dorm was mine. I haven't seen him since, but strange truth followed me back to my dorm when I was a freshman girl. Well, that's not me. This is long. I apologize in advance. I am so immensely grateful for the sub because I find this story really difficult to explain to people. I questioned myself for a long time, but finally came to the conclusion that I was, in fact, stalked. It all started when I began a new job as a lifeguard and swim instructor at a university pool. The first person I ever started a shift was with this guy named Harry. He was fairly odd, quite socially awkward, and had a quirky sense of humor. However, after the first couple of weeks of work, Harry started to strike up a pretty deep conversation with me. He asked me a lot of personal information about my family, how I grew up, and what I enjoy. My relationship with my now husband. This didn't strike me as particularly odd, as I'm very extroverted, social human, and I love talking to people about my life. His questions started to have a lot more depth, and as he began asking me deep questions about the meanings of life, my faith, and my beliefs. I'm a Christian, so I saw this as a great opportunity to explain what I believe and why. Harry began to open up about his family life in a way that made me uncomfortable. He described his parents in a way that made me feel like I had no emotional connection to them, even though they were clearly emotionally connected to him. He would describe his mother as being passive and stupid, unwilling to stand up for herself, and his father as living in fear by over-controlling Harry's actions. As time went on, the way he talked got more extreme. He kept talking about how he was different from everyone, and how he was a monster. A few times after our late night shifts, he would drive me home to my house. I often walked, but I took him up on his offers to drive when I could. He would talk to me about a lot during our shifts, which, as it is, isn't the smartest thing to do as a lifeguard. One time, a lady hopped into the deep end who didn't know how to swim. I saw it and ran to the scene, but he just watched. I asked him later why he didn't come to help me, but he shrugged it off like it wasn't a big deal. He also began to self-disclose a lot of personal information that I felt like we weren't at the right level of friendship for. He told me that he was a virgin, and then told me that he wanted to have sex so he knew how it felt. He texted me when he lost his virginity, without any protection by the way, and said that he gave the girl pleasure, but that he didn't feel anything and just finished on his own. A few weeks into his relationship with this girl, he texted me saying that he thought he had AIDS, which he didn't have. All of this information might seem like unnecessary details, I know, but they're details that I embedded in my mind that make me wonder how I could have missed some of the signs. Harry continued to text me about his emotions and lack of empathy for others. He also talked about his plans to leave his parents. He lived at home and to move to Australia. He had several $1,000s saved up, which he occasionally made me think he would give to me. In a few conversations once, he casually mentioned, "I don't know what to do with my money." And then later went, "Man, I could just give it all to you." He said it half joking and half serious, but with a tone that made me wonder if he understood the gravity of what he was saying. I was an engaged college student trying to pay for a wedding and live on more than just my rent every month. He knew that very well, but lorded his money over me without a thought that I might be a cruel thing to do. He continuously talked to me about his empty property that he had keys to, and how he'd like to take his friends there to explore the house. I don't think much of it, but I started to get really weird feeling when the things he was telling me. I was open with my fiance about the text he was sending me, and the types of questions he was asking me. We both agree it wasn't comfortable for either of us. He continued to text me late at night saying that I was his only friend. He often talked about his mental health and how he wanted to end things. He also talked about how smart he was and that he was at genius level intelligence and everyone was stupid and empathetic. Many of our conversations circulated around these topics, as well as his sex life and some of the dumb decisions he was making at risk of his own health and others. The turning point happened late one night, at 1 a.m. or so, when he sent me a text asking his hypothetical question that I knew he wasn't being hypothetical. He said, "If I drive over and knock on your door, will you say, 'Harry, it's too late, go home'? Or will you either willingly let me into your house or exit your house to take on the world with me?" I was confused and asked him to elaborate, and he said that he had keys to this house and asked if I wanted to explore it with him. It should be noted that the house was in a very sketchy part of town. I said no, and I told him that I wouldn't be very comfortable doing that with anyone, especially on that side of town. However, I got the niggling feeling that he was at my door, and sure enough, when I looked out my window, I saw him walking back to his vehicle from my doorsteps. That's when the most distinctive moment that I thought to myself, he might be a stalker. I had a panic room and called my fiance. We were long distance and pulled my roommate into my room so that I could explain the situation to them. In the following weeks, Harry continued to text me daily, if not hourly, asking me where I was and if we could meet up somewhere. I often lied or made up an excuse about why I couldn't. Eventually, he said he would be leaving for Australia and was planning on deleting all social media. He asked me for my email address and any other possible way of staying in touch with him, which I very guiltily did not give him. Finally, he left. I felt so much relief and felt like I wasn't being watched anymore or had to worry about something happening to me. It took me a really long time to acknowledge that he was a stalker. I decided to ask some female coworkers about him, especially ones I had heard he was closer to. The first thing I noticed was that there was a type. We were all blonde, curvy, and strong-willed women. We all had the same kinds of interactions with him. We would listen to him and have conversations with him, and he would text us late at night. Later, I brought up his stalkerish tendencies to a coworker who had a similar experience, and she mentioned that the house he kept referring to was where he would take women to have sex with him. There were many moments I wondered if he might be a sociopath, possibly higher functioning, or had some other mental health issues going on, besides major depression. He was isolated as a child in a very strict religious environment, and wasn't allowed to go anywhere. Anyway, maybe that's way too much information for the sub, but I needed a place to vent with people who understand what it feels like to be stalked. It might not be a particularly extreme example, but it haunts me to this day. This all happened about exactly a year ago.